includes the background, hypothesis, methods, results, interpretation, findings, and conclusions. These are usually 3,000 to 6,000 words. There are review articles. These are a critical and constructive analysis of existing literature in a field. You take what's existing, you summarize it, you compare it to each other, you analyze it to show similarities and differences between different studies, and then also identify any gaps that remain that has not yet been studied. There's 3 types. There's a literature review, which is a qualitative summary of a topic, a systematic review, which goes a step further. It's a high-level overview of primary research, and it's done in a systematic way, and I'll talk about that more in a moment. And meta-analyses are a type of systematic review. They go even a step farther, and they take all the data points, all the quantitative statistical data that's in an article, and it summarizes it, and it provides a more precise estimate that directly answers a shared research question across studies. All right, so we have this table is comparing what a literature review is to a systematic review. So a literature review is less defined. I mean, you define it yourself as the author. You define what you want it to be. It's a qualitative summary of what's existing on a subject. And it provides an overview of a topic. It can either be really general or really specific. It has the main components of any research article: introduction, methods, discussion, conclusion, and references. This can take weeks to months to do. You perform a search on 1 or 2 databases, and you just summarize what is known about that topic. Whereas a systematic review has a really focused research question that identifies, selects, synthesizes, and appraises a high-quality research evidence related to that question. So it's answering a really focused research question to eliminate any bias. It's clearly defined and answerable, and there's ways of doing that, which I'll show you next. And in addition to the typical components of a paper, you're also including in this paper a pre-specified eligibility that you did when you were choosing which articles to look at, all the criteria for choosing those articles, an assessment of the validity of the findings, and then an interpretation and presentation of the results. These take much longer to do, months to years. You would do it across several databases. And if you are doing a meta-analysis, you also need to have some statistical analytic skills. And so this is really just connecting all the high-quality evidence that exists about a topic, and it's a way to support evidence-based practice. So if you're going to do a systematic review or a meta-analysis, most journals require you to do a PRISMA statement. And that is the minimum set of criteria for reporting on these type of reviews. And it comes with a checklist and flow diagram. This is just to show you what the checklist is. This is the most recent one. So each section of your article, you will have to have all of these things in there. And on that far right column, you indicate where it is. And here's the second page. So before you even get started, or as you're doing the research, you need to make sure you're familiar with these so that you can notate and make sure you're including this in your process. And this is the flow chart you would also have to include along with it. You just fill in the blanks. This is how you narrow down the set of articles that you're going to analyze. Okay, another type of manuscript is a clinical case study. This is primary literature. These are a way to share new knowledge about a rare or unusual disease or approach to a common condition. These are usually in the medical literature to help medical professionals improve their knowledge of a diagnosis, treatment, or prognosis. And they're often used to teach or train medical students and practitioners. And they discuss the signs, symptoms, diagnosis, or treatment of a disease. All right, and then there's also this this smaller type of research, or it's not really research article, it's a small type of article that many journals offer. They have different names and they all have their own definitions, but typically there's perspective, opinions, and commentaries. This is secondary literature. It's a scholarly review of a topic in a field. It's usually a shorter essay, and it's a brief personal point of view. If it's a perspective, these are typically defined as something that's timely or relevant review of concepts or related concepts. An opinion is the author's viewpoint or interpretation of a study, but it has to include evidence to support their critiques. And a commentary just is a way to draw attention to something or to critically review something else or to take a position on an issue. Right. So all of what each journal will very clearly define how they what they mean by each of these. All right. So are you ready to write? I recommend starting with choosing a target journal. If you do this early in the process, I think it's step one. It makes it easier to hone in on your paper's message for the journal's audience. It also will save you a lot of time just knowing where you're going and what that journal expects out of you. It'll want to choose one based on the aim, scope, and audience. This can be a really broad audience or scope or a very specific subspecialty. Every journal has an impact factor and indexing. The impact factor is based on the number of times a typical article in that journal is cited in the first year or two after publication. The higher the impact factor, the more, the better. You want to publish in as high of impact factor as you're able to. Other researchers will, instead of looking at the impact factor, will prioritize a journal that's indexed in Medline or some other disciplinary collection, because it just increases the likelihood that that article will be seen and then cited in their research. You also want to consider the turnaround time. Really high profile journals like JAMA and the New England Journal of Medicine have really low acceptance rates. They also have a really high turnaround time because they only send a very few manuscripts that they receive out for external peer review. Whereas really specialty journals will have a higher acceptance, that do have a higher acceptance rate, may have a slower turnaround because they have a smaller pool of external reviewers to look at the manuscript. So it just takes more time for that to go through the peer review process. You are only allowed to submit to one journal at a time. And every time when you submit a journal, it's part of like a checklist or something that you confirm that, yes, I'm only submitting this here. It's just not permitted to submit more than one in health sciences. Okay, as you're looking for journals, beware of predatory journals. This is a growing business out there, a publication business that will accept every submission they receive upon payment. And some other journals also are open access, and you can pay to have yours published there. And that just means that anyone who goes on PubMed can access it without having to have payment to that journal. So that's a benefit of paying sometimes, but predatory journals is always pay to play, and you don't want to go there. So ways to watch out if it's a predatory one, and also conferences. Once you publish, you're going to get tons of emails from predatory journals and conferences offering you a free trip to Milan. Like, that sounds awesome, but it's usually fake. So just be careful. If you get an unsolicited spam email address, Tulane's really good at putting those in the spam folder. If someone promises a really quick turnaround time, just trying to incentivize you to publish there. If you go to their website, they've launched very few articles, or they have really poorly written author guidelines. I was checking one out recently that looked like it was a website from 2003. It was all pixelated and it was hard to maneuver. And it's this is a sign that it's a predatory journal. So just beware. Okay, so you found a real legit journal. You know which one you're going to go with. The next thing you're going to do is you're going to read the guide for authors. You're going to read this very carefully before you start writing. This will tell you their types of acceptable articles. It'll tell you all the formatting requirements, the word limitations, if they have any limitations on tables and figures, the reference style that they require, and any kind of additional submission materials like a cover letter, or if you're doing a meta-analysis like the Prisma checklist and flowchart. Okay, so now let's look at what a manuscript is. They all contain, so we're looking at original manuscripts because that's most of what y'all will be reading and writing. So these are the typical components. We'll go through each of these. The abstract is the first thing that you read. And the purpose of this abstract, sometimes called a summary, is should the reader read the entire article. It tells the complete story of your research article in one short little paragraph. And there are typically three types. Descriptive is less about the results and more about what topics are discussed in the article. This is used more in like review articles than original research articles. An informative abstract is a brief background, major points of your methods and results and conclusion. And then some journals require a structure abstract, which pretty much follows the subheadings in your article, the context, the background, the design, the objective. But once again, like look back at that guide for authors, it'll tell you exactly what they require here. Then there's the background introduction. This is the why, the how, and what to expect if they keep reading. This provides essential background information needed to understand the problem and why you embarked on the research that you did. It identifies the gap in the research that existed before you did your research. It states your objectives and your hypotheses and introduces your study design, and it clearly explains the purpose of your study. It also describes your source population, setting, and dates of the study. Sometimes that's in the methods, sometimes they want it in the background or introduction. Okay, so here's an article I published a few years ago that just shows you, if you're looking at an article, what, how it flows. So here I had my essential background info. I had the gap in the research. My aims and purpose followed that because it was responding to the gaps in the research. I introduced my study design. I stated my objectives and my hypotheses. Okay. Then you go into the methods, and this is how did you answer the research question? You give all the information that describes what you did and why that was a reasonable approach. You're going to describe your research design, why you chose that design, the location and setting of your study, the sample selection and how you chose that sample, what the eligibility criteria that you chose, any kind of group assignment or case definitions if that's applicable, your key outcomes, exposures, and variables, the data collection method that you employed, your statistical methods, and any kind of ethical considerations. This is usually where you put like your institution approved this research through the IRB. So typically, so this is a lot of information, but typically the word limits of an article will prevent someone from completely recreating your study. You're not presenting your research protocol here. You're just summarizing these different parts. And some journals will require a research protocol, but that's usually going to be like a supplement. So this is not to be, you're not giving away everything or telling everything here because you just don't have the space to do that. But it does include a lot. All right, the next section is results. This is reporting relevant results that go back to your purpose. So you're reporting the data and you're telling the readers what happened in the study. This describes, you're going to describe the study population that you ended up having, including the sample size and their demographics. You're going to report the relevant results, use figures and tables. You're going to start with the results that directly relate back to your objective or your hypotheses, regardless of whether or not they're significant. If you had results that were not statistically significant and you did not report on them, it would look like you're hiding something. You need to report that because this is the reason why you did your research. And you want to describe the most important results in numbers, and then everything else can just be referred to the tables or charts. Once again, word limits will prevent you from describing everything. So just the top findings, excuse me, and then you can refer to the tables and figures. Okay, a few notes about when you're in your results section, just from reporting numbers. Excuse me. If it's a number that's less than 10, spell it out. Do not begin a sentence with a number. I see this a lot in student writing. If you want to say 63%, don't even write out 63%. Say many or most or almost 2/3, and then put the exact number in parentheses. If you're reporting a percentage, the numerator and denominator should be apparent. So among patients with diabetes, that was 17 out of 80, also had a heart disease. So that just shows you how that value was found. But if the denominator is less than 20, that's a really small sample. It doesn't really make sense to report it in percentages because it's misleading. It seems like it would be a lot more than it really is if you've got such a small sample. When you're reporting 95% confidence interval, this adds meaning and precision to your results. So here's two examples of 100 students who were examined, 30 tested positive for HPV. And the second one says of 10,000 students examined, 3,000 tested positive for HPV. So for both of these, the prevalence is 30%. You can see with the difference in the 95% confidence interval, for the first one, it's really wide. So you have less confidence that that would be like a representative sample of students in that particular place. Whereas the 10,000 one is also 30%, but the confidence interval is much narrower, which reflects a more precise estimate of the true prevalence. When you're reporting a p-value, this is to show if analyses found any significant difference between two groups. It refers to a statistical significance. It's not necessarily clinical significant. If you have a huge sample size, like tens of thousands, you're looking at, usually this would be like looking at like claims data or something like with a lot of data. It might show, it will most likely show that it's statistically significant, but that number doesn't necessarily translate into clinical significance. And that's just something that you need to think about and talk to about with like the practitioners, like what would this really mean in like your work? Report it as exact as possible. Something is considered is defined as being statistically significant if the p is less than 0.05. But if you found a p of 0.03, just report the exact number. All right, so for figures and tables, these should be self-explanatory and could stand alone. And so in order to do that, you need to have a really clear descriptive title that identifies or describes the type of data that's going to be there and any qualifications needed to understand it. The reader should not have to refer back to the text to just understand what your table is showing. The interpretation maybe, but not just to understand what you were trying to show there. The attributes of each variable should be clearly indicated. Say whether these are accrued or adjusted estimates. And then the base on the percentage are computed and they should be indicated. Like that's your sample. If it's a percent or if it's per 10,000 women or something like that, you need to say what that is. Okay, thought there was more. If you have any missing data, make sure you indicate it. Don't try to hide something like that. Typically the norm to round to 2 decimal points. If you have to choose using use a percentage or the number, use a percent. It's just easier for people to interpret. And if you have a really big table, it's because you need to the next page, you need to have that title there again at the top and note that it's a continuation from the previous page. So when you're presenting data, you have to balance detail versus manageability. You want to be able to provide the readers with the fullest degree of detail, but it needs to be in a manageable form. So if you're having a table and you have the responses were all yes, no, you could just do % yes instead of having a column for yes and no. The no is implied if you're showing what yes is, because it's just 2 answers, so it has to equal 100. A picture is great if you can fit one in and find one that's useful. All right. So now you've made it to your discussion section. This is the meaning and the implications of your results. This summarizes the key findings and how they achieve the goals of the study. It describes your results in comparison to what's already known about the topic, which is something that you discuss in your introduction as well. But now you have your own results. You compare it to what people have already found and that was similar. and here you generalize your results to similar populations or settings. You can't generalize them to the entire population of wherever, but just like you did this in a specific area, and your results could be generalized to other people like that in the same specific area or setting. Here you can speculate on the implications for public health or in your region. This is, again, based on the data that you found and also supporting data that already exists, not on your emotions, not on your suppositions. This is also the section of your paper where you discuss the strengths of your study and the limitations that you had. The limitations is an opportunity to self-critique your own study. This is when you're being honest about your limitations, and that you recognize that your study had limitations, because every single study has limitations. It's impossible to even design a perfect study. Everything's going to have a limitation. And if you don't discuss your limitations, it may make the reviewer think that you did not think that there were any, or that you were trying to hide something. So just be upfront about them. Everyone knows you have them. And you can also discuss the limitation, but then how you try to like correct that or balance that, or why that limitation had to exist. There's like no way around it. So you do that there. And then your next section is a conclusion section. This is why your research matters. This is where you synthesize all the key points that you found. You're very specific about what you found. It must be supported by the data from your research that was presented in the results section. Don't introduce something new here that wasn't already introduced in the results. Also, this should relate back to the introduction, demonstrating the relevance of your outcome and how it is part of the bigger picture of the research being done in this area. And this is also where you can suggest, make a few suggestions for future research. This could be done based on your limitations that you had. Like, I wasn't able to study it in this population, but others should because they are also experiencing this problem. And then lastly, for your paper, you'll have end matter. This is something the journal will specifically ask you for and what it should be. It's different for every journal, but it could be like each author's contributions will go here, and it'll tell you what they mean by that. Like someone did the writing, someone did the analysis. This is where you acknowledge your funding source or sources. You acknowledge contributors to this research that did not meet authorship criteria. I want to talk about that in a little bit, but like this would be like your research subjects or like staff who helped with your research. Any kind of possible conflicts of interest they may ask you to mention here as well. I'm sorry, the very last part is your reference section. The author guidelines will tell you the preferred style and if there's a maximum number allowed. Please use a citation manager. This is going to make your life a lot easier. I like EndNote. There's a small learning curve when you're getting started, but then once you're using it, you'll never go back to manually putting in references and moving them around. Yeah, once you start writing papers longer than 4 pages, it makes sense to use a citation manager. And then let's see. All right, so every article has a title. This is really important. This immediately connects the research to your potential interested readers. So they will first see the title and then they'll read the abstract, and that'll help bring them to the full article. So the title is super important. It also includes a lot of information. It should include the setting and location, who your patients and subjects were, if there was an intervention, what that was, if there was a control condition, what was the outcome, study design, time period. Yeah, it's a lot. So I want to give y'all a moment to practice writing a title. I'm going to limit y'all to 80 characters and spaces. So here's your elements that you need to include in this title. It's a study that was done among women in urban health clinics. They were women who were seeking contraception. The intervention was providers were being trained in contraceptive counseling that were founded on principles of reproductive justice. The control condition were providers that did not receive that training. The outcome is the contraceptive choice of the women seeking contraception, and it was a randomized control trial. Time was not a factor in this study, so you don't need to mention that in your title. All right, I'm going to give you a moment. be clear, you want it to be brief. Those online want to put it in the chat what they came up with, and let me know if it was more than 80 characters. Anyone ready to share? All right, I did this myself too. So my very first attempt had 122 characters. And the second one did not. And I found that I couldn't include all the information, but it's like the randomized control trial part, that's a lot of letters and characters that can be inferred through provider training. Yeah, it's a art, it's a practice. But also just writing briefly as something that we practice over and over and over again. All right. Let's get on to writing. This is how to actually write a manuscript. These are some writing tips. All right. So when you read a manuscript, you start with the abstract, you end with the references. You go in order of the way that it's going to be presented and as it's presented to you reading it. But when you're writing it, I recommend going a little bit of a different way. Methods is often the easiest place to start, and I think that's a good place to start because it just gets you going. If you had a study protocol, which you most likely did, you most likely submitted it to your IRB, that is your method section. That's what you ended up, that's what you did. It's not your results, it's not anything that came before or after that, but you've already written that up. And so you can like copy and paste from your study protocol. And then also with your data, you can start, the next thing you can do is start creating these figures and tables. And then from there, you can do your results because you're basing it off those figures and tables that you just worked on. I say do the abstract or summary last because you don't, as you're writing this over and over and over again, you're going to be changing things up. And so you don't want your abstract or summary to be different than what you actually have in the paper. So it's best to just save that to the very end because it's a summary of what your paper is. All right. So just some general writing tips for manuscript writing. It's active voice is what you should be using, but it's okay to use passive voice in the methods because you're describing what you did in the past. It's also okay to refer to yourself as I or we, the researchers, instead of the authors, because you're as a researcher, you're the one writing it, you did it. You're not writing it about someone else. So it would just be weird to read that the authors did this because you are the author researcher. Avoid any non-standard abbreviations, resist TMA, too many acronyms. Write in your own words. Almost no scientific article, and I actually can't think of any times, but I'll just say almost none, directly quote from another source word for word. So what you're going to do is you're going to paraphrase other work that's been done. But when you paraphrase, this does not remove the requirement that you need to still cite that source because you're citing their idea, you're citing their findings. You're just not going to specifically write in quotation marks or otherwise what they did. You have to paraphrase this. I can't remember what book I like scanned this from, but this just shows you how to, so you have a direct quote in that one column, and then the paraphrase shows you what it means by paraphrasing, and then you always reference. And there's different styles of referencing, but yeah, so you must paraphrase other people's work. this is like in your introduction section and your discussion when you're going back to how your results compare to other people's work. So the difference between common knowledge and specific knowledge, common knowledge is also called general knowledge. And this refers to what a typical person in the discipline would know in the readership of this journal. And it does not require a citation. However, even when I'm in like a very specific journal to audience who knows, I don't need to define everything necessarily, or like what these terms mean, because we all use these terms. I'm still gonna find like the first time this was used, or like the quintessential article that like set this research off, and like quote that of like, I'm saying unintended pregnancies in the United States have been increasing over the last decades. I'm going to go back and find a source for that, even though everyone in my field already knows that. Because when in doubt, just cite and err on the side of using a citation, and it shows respect for all the people who did the work before you came and added yours to the literature. Specific knowledge is like a statistic or result of a particular field or laboratory study, and this must be cited. However, I'm saying that you should cite everything. All right, avoiding plagiarism. So this occurs when you use someone's wording, their thoughts, imagery, or creative output, and it's repeated in a new document without attributing that to the original author. This is a major violation of scholarly integrity, and it can have a damaging long-term impact on your professional career. You never want to cut and paste anything from anywhere. Even if you didn't realize what you're doing was plagiarism, it's still plagiarism, and it's up to you to educate yourself and learn what is plagiarism and how to avoid it. Yeah, in other classes I teach, I like talk more about like how to do this and what the different types of plagiarism is, but we don't have time now. But the libraries at Tulane have good resources that like simply explain what is plagiarism, the different types of plagiarism, so you don't accidentally do it. Because most students, that's what it is. They don't realize that they're plagiarizing something. Self-plagiarism is not okay. So if you have published on this topic already and you're using that, you're like referring back to that in your introduction, and that was you, and most likely it wasn't just you anyway, so you had co-authors, but you still need to cite that. So you're like, oh, well, I already wrote that. These are my words. You still need to cite it in an article. All right. So now that you're writing, you're going to write, and you're going to rewrite, and you're going to rewrite again, and then you're going to revise. This is from a former editor of the Journal of American Medical Association. And revision, this literally means to see again. And so the more that you write and think, the more you rewrite and you rethink, and the stronger your paper is going to become. All right, so now you're ready to submit. You did not write this alone, but, and actually, I should have moved this to the front. You want to talk about authorship before this point. In fact, you need to talk about this before you start writing and make sure everyone's on the same page, because things can get a little icky and people can get territorial, or it's better to just start with authorship and the order of authorship before y'all start writing this manuscript together. Okay, but these are what typically the different locations of the author's name means. So the first author, the first one mentioned, this is the main writer. This is the researcher who did most of the work on writing the manuscript. Then there's the middle authors. These can be listed in order of overall contributions to the manuscript. Sometimes they're listed in alphabetical order. Usually, so first author is like the most prestigious spot. Second author is like second, and last author is also high up there. And because there's prestige associated with the order, that's why y'all need to talk about it and agree upon it before y'all get started. The last author is the senior author. This is often the PI, the person in charge of overseeing the project. Regardless of their contributions to the manuscript, they still contribute to the manuscript, but they're not the lead writer. The first author is. And other people you might want to include are any advisors, consultants, research assistants, community partners. Again, all of these people must contribute to the article, not the research. That's different. So who to include is often outlined by the journal guidelines. So look at that. And then there's also another like tag of someone being the correspondent author. This is a person communicating with the journal, the person doing the submissions and revisions. This is usually the first author, their responsibility. All right, so author qualifications. This is any person who made significant contributions to the article. They're going to share responsibility and accountability for results. So the American Journal of Public Health's authorship qualifications, for example, say that every author listed must have made a substantial contribution to the concept and design or the analysis and interpretation of the data. They had a role in drafting or revising the manuscript, and they approved the final version. You cannot submit a final version without making sure they all approved of it, because their name is on there and they are responsible for what you're putting out there. Let's see. All right. Most journals require a cover letter. This should seek to convince the editor that your work is important, valid, and original, and that it's a good fit with the aims and scopes of that journal. So they're going to want to house it. They're going to want people to be looking for this article, and then they would be citing their journal. So this needs to be convincing. I know y'all can't read this, but this is just to show y'all the different components of a cover letter. So just like a standard, like formal letter, you have your address information, the opening salutation, the purpose, why are you writing them this letter, what your main findings were, how that's relevant to the journal. And then sometimes they will tell you that the author guidelines will say, you need to make this statement in your cover letter. Like there was no conflict of interest among the authors. And then your contact information as well. All right, so now you're on the website of the journal, you're ready to submit, you've like uploaded all your stuff, and now they're going to ask you for some keywords. These are words or phrases that suggest what the manuscript's about. They will accompany the manuscript to facilitate online researches. So these don't show up in the article, but they are somehow like tacked on, I don't know, in the code or something, where people are searching for these words, that yours will show up as an example of something that has that keyword or phrase. This is used, you want to think carefully about these, because these can enhance the frequency with which your article is cited. If people can find it, they can cite it. Sometimes it's a single word, sometimes it's short phrases. The guidelines, again, will let you know what you should think about when selecting your keywords. Some only let you select a predefined set of terms, which can be pretty long and lengthy and specific, but they're called these mesh terms. So they might just show you those and you check which ones apply to your work. When you're selecting these, and there's usually a limit, like 3 to 8 or something like that, you want to focus on the main topic of your paper. And you also want to try to use variant terms. Again, this is going to allow people to find your article. So if you had contraception in the title, check off family planning as a keyword. They both mean the same thing. And there are 2 different ways that someone's searching using keywords in the search bar, that they could find your article. And it's also helpful here to use techniques or methodology. So that might not have made it to your title, but people are looking for a specific method, and you have an example of how that method was used. So it's also a good way to include that as a way of people finding your article. Okay, so you are ready to submit here. Let's see. Oh, there we go. Okay, so you're going to look at your article again through a reviewer's eyes. You're going to be self-critical about this. Are you answering all of the parts? Is everything there? Of course, you're going to share it with your co-authors. You could even ask other people to read your manuscript, especially people outside the field, to make sure that they understand it. You know, do spell check, follow the guidelines. You know, if they have a certain font size or reference style, make sure that you're following the guidelines. Otherwise, they're going to reject it because you couldn't follow instructions. And submit it as perfect as possible. At some point, after reading and reading and revising, it's never going to be totally perfect, but you need to submit it as perfect as you can get it. All right, so what happens next? It could either be, sorry, was blurry. it's going to go to the editors who can either just reject it outright, say this does not match with what we're looking for, or for whatever reasons, you often don't know. They could reject it, or they could send it out for external peer review. And so that's usually 3 people, these peer experts, and they are either going to collectively reject it, request revisions, or accept it. I had one last year that had each reviewer was in each of these 3 categories. One said reject outright, one requested revisions, and one accepted. I've never had to go out for peer review and then get it rejected outright or accepted outright. It's usually a request for revisions. Anyways, it ended up getting published, I guess 2 out of 3. The other one was overridden. And then, so you submit your revisions, and you usually get one more chance to do like a final round of revisions, and then it's either accepted or rejected. All right, so when you're invited to revise and resubmit, also called R&R, you have to have 2 documents. You have an edited version of your manuscript, and then you also have a file that shows how you answered each and every review or comment. Do not ignore any of them. You might not agree with all of them, but try to they might make an unreasonable suggestion, and you can politely say, I'm unable to include that in my study because of this. It's just not a reasonable thing that I can do. But almost all the time, you want to actually make changes to your manuscript because of their suggestions. I would reserve 1 or 2 I respectfully disagree type things. So you have to say how you changed your manuscript in response to a specific comment and show where in the new manuscript that changes. I will say every single article that I've gotten to revise and resubmit is stronger the next time. All of the critical review and suggestions that you get from the authors always ends up making it stronger and better than the very first one you submitted. All right, so yay, celebrate, it's been accepted. The journal will give you page proofs that you get to review one final time before it's published. And then once the published article is cited for the first time in another article, this is, the soonest this could happen would be about a year or so after publication because they have to do their research and then publish theirs. This completes the research cycle. Okay, so this is, I've given this lecture a few times before, and this is the first time that I am including this because this just became relevant to me this summer when I submitted an article, and for the first time I was asked to have comment on any AI use that was required. Whether or not we did, we had to make a statement about it. All right, so to create these slides, I asked ChatGPT to summarize bullet points, academic journal guidelines regarding AI use in writing, because every journal has their own guidelines for the author. And so each of them, I imagine, will have their own guidelines for AI. So I wanted like a summary of those. And then, of course, I did my due diligence when using AI. I reviewed the guidelines based on my new, albeit limited, exposure to journal guidelines about using AIs. And I also checked out some of the journals to make sure that it is indeed what they were saying. But it was a way to get started. So here's what they're expecting. Transparency and disclosure. Always say if AI tools were used. Mention the tool, the version, and the purpose. And did you use it for editing? Did you use it for summarizing? AI cannot be listed as an author. You're responsible for the accuracy and the originality of your article. Some acceptable uses, though. So if you use AI, it doesn't mean that this is not acceptable. But some uses are okay, like for grammar help or editing for clarity, or for summarizing or using it to create an outline. What's not allowed is creating new scientific content or interpretations, or submitting AI written text without checking it, or also if you're using it in the introduction for some reason, I don't really recommend doing. But if you were to do that, it would infer that it was referenced somewhere. You have to, of course, add citations. always check with the journal's policy before submitting. And then make sure if you are just going to copy and paste, which I don't recommend doing, you want to avoid any plagiarism or bias or errors because these AI systems are not perfect and it's up to you and you're responsible for what gets published. So here's an example of what some journal articles, what their policies are on AI use. So just so you can see, and this was summarized in the previous slide, but this shows you what they're looking for. This is new. All right. Actually, I don't think we have an evaluation, but any questions?
Yeah, I have a question.
Yes.
What is like the typical amount of like revise and resubmit that you get from a journal when they're like asking for revisions?
I think 2, unless it's like really close, and they might give you like another chance. Usually after revising and resubmit, it's accepted the next time because you've like answered all their concerns and you've improved your paper. But if they give you one more, yeah.
Okay, and then how like common is it for them to say like revise, resubmit, and then like decline it?
That would be weird because if it got to the point where they're like, because if you're a reviewer, which you will be once you start getting accepted, that journal will then ask you to be a reviewer. You're asked to like categorize a paper that you're reviewing as like accept without revisions, accept with minor revisions, accept with major revisions, or reject. So if you're getting that revise and resubmit letter, then they've already accepted it contingent on those revisions. Yeah.
And oh, sorry.
That's okay.
And like, how long does that process usually take?
Yeah, it depends on the journal. I mean, some have been like held up for like a year, especially during COVID. Things were just really bad. It was hard to reach reviewers. If it's been a few months, you should contact the editor. It shouldn't take that long. They don't want it to take that long. It's usually an issue of finding reviewers, or the reviewers taking too long. As a reviewer, they've started giving us like, get this back to us in 2 weeks. Yeah, it's usually the bottleneck is finding the reviewers. Yeah. Yes.
So I do have a question. I don't know if you mentioned it earlier, but so if you submit to one of them and then you get an outright rejection, do they give you the chance to edit it and send it back again, or they just tell you you have to go look for another one?
Go look for another one, and you'll find one. I was I remember feeling really discouraged the first. I don't feel this way anymore, but it still happens. Feel really discouraged when you get rejected, but you'll eventually find one that will.
Is there like a monitoring system, like a credit history thing? That's the other one who know that you've been.
No, but no, they won't know that. And I wouldn't mention it like in your letter to the editor. But no, they won't know. And it's up to you to just be honest, because like you always have to click like I'm only submitting it to one journal, because you just have to wait. That's what takes so long. But it wouldn't be right or fair to like submit to like all the journals and then see which one bites. So yeah, they won't know. But when you do submit to another journal, like make sure you start from the beginning again of looking at the author guidelines, because your manuscript you submitted for that first time is not going to be exactly what they want or need or follow their formatting criteria. So it's more work again, but it's less than the first time.
My second question has got to do with peer reviewing. You have to have published a couple of how many times before you be considered a peer reviewer?
I haven't been asked until I published in that journal. Like, I don't know if you could volunteer, but it's usually once I've been published in that journal, then they start asking me. Yeah.
So they will ask you.
Yes. Yeah, they'll send it out. I wonder, I don't know. Maybe you could email them and be like, you need to be an expert in your field, which is demonstrated through publications. But maybe you could, if you are an expert in something, but you weren't published in that journal, just be like, I really love to review for y'all. Because they are looking for reviewers. That's not, they don't have a problem with having too many reviewers. So if you fit their criteria for what a reviewer needs to be, yeah, I'd be happy to have you. Yeah.
Kind of to piggyback off of this question, if you like published in the journal, but you're not, a PhD, will they would they like you as a reviewer, or do you need to have PhD to be a reviewer?
I think they would like it. Yeah, I don't know. I've never been on the journal end of things. Yeah, I don't know how they, I just know I'm never asked until I've published there.
Right.
Yeah, but I don't know if they look at degrees and stuff. I feel like if you've published, you're an expert in that topic because you pass peer review.
Right.
Because they are the experts and they are hard. That picture, that little cartoon is like pretty accurate of what it's like to go through the process. Put it back up. Yeah. If you can pass that, I think that, yeah, you've demonstrated your worth.
My last question has got to do with EndNote.
Yes.
I've been using Zotero. Are there any recommendations how to go about EndNote, or once I'm doing Zotero, I'm fine with that?
Oh yeah, you're fine with anyone. I just mentioned EndNote because that's what I use, but anyone's fine. And sometimes they can talk to each other. Like if your co-author uses EndNote, they should be able to download your references easily and upload it. It should be okay. Yeah. If you like that one, stick with it. Yeah. All right, everyone. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, I posted an evaluation in the chat for a post-event survey. And after this, if you registered through Zoom, we'll make sure that you get the PowerPoint, the recording, and the post-event survey. So for those in the room, if you didn't register on Zoom, just give me your email and then I'll make sure to get that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Melissa.
Thank you.